Of hearing me preach and being involved in our services, you hear me say this a lot, that I'm excited about a message. I'm not only excited about what we have to talk about from Scripture today, I'm excited about what it means for our church. We have some opportunities in front of us that through this message I want to kind of lay out and let us be in prayer about and move towards. And I'm just really excited, and I'm going to get this ready, and I'll try to post it for folks who weren't able to be here today so that they can hear it. If they choose to. But last Sunday in Sunday school, I asked this question. I said, how many times, when are some times in your lives when you've encountered unexpected hospitality? You just didn't expect it. And some good stories emerged. Stories of things that happened at people's work, that happened in their lives. It was interesting. And then throughout the week, I thought of one in my own life. I remember I don't know, it must have been 2001, 2002, it was 2002. I suddenly, unexpectedly just lost a job. They just closed my level of management down. And there I was. And we were perplexed as anybody would be. 4 children, a mortgage and responsibilities, and there we were. And I remember this lady who's passed away now, senior adult lady, came to our house one day. In the middle of the day, I was inside working on something. She knocked on the door. And she'd never really been to our house other than just to visit briefly. And she walked in and she had a bag with her, a box, and she opened it. And there were a couple food items in there. And I thought, wow, that's really sweet. And it was just an unexpected act of kindness. There was also peanut butter in there. So I was really happy then. Jif peanut butter. I mean, this was great. And as we sat and we talked for a few minutes, something just happened. And here's kind of the story. Years before I ever knew this woman or her daughter, her husband and the daughter's father had committed suicide. I didn't know that story. They lived in Texas at the time. And for a couple decades, she had carried some real untruth about that. About maybe she was responsible, maybe God had judged him because of that, or this or that, just lots of things that weren't necessarily true that she was believing. And lo and behold, in the process of talking, I shared with her a paragraph or two out of a book I'd helped write where we talked about that. And I shared with her the verse in Romans 8:29, I think, that says, I'm convinced that neither life nor death nor principalities nor things present nor things to come can separate me from the hand of God or from the love of God. And I shared with her how that my pastor and her pastor at the time had said that even our own hand could not separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. Although God did not approve of that, it did not separate us from his love because of that particular act. God just showed up in that moment. It was a red letter moment in my life and in hers. And in this act of compassion that she gave to me and in my receiving her into my home, we were both enormously blessed. She rushed home to tell her daughter. She called me about 45 minutes later and she said, give my daughter that verse again. I can't quite get it right. Tell me, I want to read that verse to her. I want to share that with her. And it was a special moment for us. And interestingly, what I've found is that in the Older Testament of the Bible, there's a story, true story, about Abraham encountering someone and showing unlikely hospitality. And in the midst of that, God himself shows up and fulfills an amazing promise for Abraham. So let me kind of take us to the story. This is in Genesis chapter 18, if you want to turn there, or I can just read it for you. In Genesis chapter 18, this is what we read. It says, and the Lord appeared unto him, that's Abraham, in the plains of Mamre. And he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men stood by him, or near him. Now that's a pretty amazing thing to think about what's going to happen. In the hot desert heat of the plains of Mamre, Abraham is trying to find some shade, and there is none to speak of because it's kind of a desert area. It is a desert area. And he's found a little relief, apparently, in the doorway of his tent, his home, And he's sitting there in what little shade he can find. And he looks up and he sees three men coming. He can't make out who they are, apparently. He doesn't know them. He can tell they're strangers, and he doesn't know who they are. And this is Abraham, by the way. If you just remember, this is the Abraham through which Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike trace their foundation. He's truly a patriarch of the world's three primary religions. And look at what he does. It says in the third verse down, I think, it says, and when he saw them, these three men, he ran to meet them from the tent door. Now that's an odd response. You would think that a man of some means, as Abraham was, would not run to meet anybody. He would wait for them to come to him. But more significantly, you would think he would not run to meet total strangers. See, strangers in this time and culture were not bound by your local customs. They were not bound by your religious rights, your civil laws. They were strangers. They were just passing through. And more often than not, strangers represent danger in this case. They could have pillaged his home. There were three of them and one of him. And we don't know how many servants and workers he had around, but obviously in the story, the context is it was Abraham and these three men. Yet Abraham hiked up his skirt and ran to meet them. And my experience is that even today, when people come to our door at our homes, we don't run to meet them, do we? Somebody knocks on your door today, even if 911's right there on your cell phone, you can call them. We don't run out and meet them. We don't go out and say, hey, what are you doing here? Come on in, open the door, just let them in. We vet them a little bit, and possibly rightfully so. I mean, if we don't know them, especially if you live alone. Abraham threw all that caution to the wind, and he showed just unbelievable hospitality. But look on further in at what he did. And he bowed himself, now we're in verse 3, he bowed himself toward the ground and said, my Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. Do you get that? These are strangers. These are travelers. They don't have means. They need a place to sleep. They need a place to bathe. They need a place to water their animals. They need food. But yet Abraham bowed before them. Not in worship, but in humility. And he said, if I've found favor in your sight, don't leave. Don't go away. Let me minister to you. Not once did he interrogate them. We don't see anything about him going, what are you doing here? You're not from around here. What's going on? I don't recognize your accent. I don't know where you're from. What are you doing here in the plains of Mamre? And instead, he, in the face of potential danger, he embraced them. He ran to meet them. He prostrated himself before them and put himself really in danger. Made himself very vulnerable. Like I said, there were three of them and one of him. His servants were probably out working if they were there at all. I mean, these people could have pillaged his home, taken everything he had, captured his wife, and been away. And we know Abraham was up in years also. He wasn't a young, healthy, sturdy man at this point. And we read on and we see what happens. They reply, and we hear this as Abraham continues to talk. He says, let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under this tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread and comfort your hearts. After that you shall pass on. For therefore you come to your servant. And they said, so do as you have said. I love that. Abraham sought to serve them, not to be served by them. Abraham didn't look at them and go, well, what can you do for me? I see you've got some nice olive oil there. And I see you're carrying some dried meat. I tell you what, I'll trade you that for some food. You help me, I'll help you. He said, let me get some water. Let me wash your feet. And that's an act of humility. Normally a servant would wash the person's feet. Yet it appears Abraham was immediately and directly involved in washing the feet of these three men. And then he said, he hastened into his tent in verse 6 and said to Sarah, his wife, Quick, make ready 3 measures of fine linen, knead it, make cakes upon the hearth. And Abraham ran out to his herd and fetched a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the young men. And he hasted to dress it. And he took butter and milk and the calf which he had dressed and set it before them. And he stood by under the tree, and they did eat. So not only did he rush out to receive them, he engaged others in this mission. He got his wife involved. But then he made an investment, a personal investment. He killed one of his own calves. He prepared his own food, and then he humbly served it to them and stood by and made sure they were served and all their needs were met as they ate. And these are strangers. And when Abraham started feeding 3 strangers, it cost him something. And then they asked him a question that this could have turned everything. Now remember, in Abraham's life, way back, if you remember the story, Abraham was traveling through, I think it was Egypt, and he lied about Sarah being his wife and told them that Sarah was his sister because he didn't want them to violate him, to violate her. They didn't want him to kill him and take her and violate her. And he exposed his wife to that. Horrible. He twisted the truth. Even though there was some relationship there, they were husband and wife. And now the question comes up here, where is Sarah, your wife? He could have lied again, but he didn't. He said, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, behold, she's in the tent. Could have changed everything. It's okay to feed them. It's okay to feed those strangers. That's good. It's okay to be kind to them. It's okay to let them water their animals. It's okay to wash their feet. But my family's not getting involved in this. You stay right here, keep my family safely inside. Now, I remember the turning point in my own life right after the event I was telling you about earlier, maybe within 6 months of that, where we made a choice in the Sunday school class I was teaching. It was a class of about 40 people any Sunday, 40 or 50. And we made a choice to serve a meal to homeless people. But instead of just serving it, we invited them to church. We got them there. We worshiped together. Then we moved into another building, and instead of standing safely across a serving table from them and plopping food in front of them, we had a family-style meal. And we sat at the table with our children and our spouses, and we ate lunch with people very different than we are, strangers in our lives. And I remember distinctly a couple people just really being up in arms. I remember one lady in particular, she just came unglued. I am not letting my children be with those people. What kind of diseases do they have? What kind of this? What kind of that? And she was pretty upset. She took her children and left. She said, I'll serve them, but I won't eat with them. And I won't bring my children in there. Now, that's the bad news. I'll tell you the good news. Now, 12, 13 years later, that lady runs a ministry to foster children, and she has fostered and I think has maybe adopted a foster child into her home now. So God bless her for that change in her heart that has happened over the last years. And that encourages me. But Abraham was faced with that same decision when they asked about Sarah. And then something unbelievable happens. One of the men looked at him and said, I'm coming back about this time next year, and when I arrive, your wife Sarah will have a son. Wow. Abraham didn't realize it, but God had shown up in that situation. Karen Armstrong said it this way. She said, his practical compassion led directly to a divine encounter. Abraham's running to meet the stranger, embracing the stranger, feeding the stranger, caring for the stranger, led to a divine encounter with God. And God, through this person, in this most intimate, vulnerable time in Abraham's home, was there to fulfill a promise that was decades old. Remember the Abrahamic covenant? Where God took Abraham out and said, Abraham, look at the stars of the sky. Look at the sands of the sea below you. Your offspring will be numberless like that. as many, as numberless as the sky's stars and as the sea's sands of grains of sand. And Abraham and his wife were up in age now. They had not had a legitimate child. And there they were. And the promise of God's bountiful blessing of children and a family like they had envisioned was fading. Fading so much that Sarah laughed when she heard the guy say this. She's like, I'm an old lady. What are you talking about? I'm almost 100 years old. But we know that from that was born Isaac. And now through Isaac and even Ishmael, the son that was born in less than desirable circumstances, through Hagar, the offspring truly are numberless of Christians, Jews, and Muslims around the world. But Abraham saw that fulfillment of that promise. And what led to it, what brought him to receiving the fulfillment of the promise straight from the lips of God, was his kindness and compassion, the way he received the stranger. He ran to the stranger. He didn't begrudgingly say, oh, come on in, guys. Come on. Don't mess up my tent. Just hurry. Don't take your shoes off. You're stinky. You've been trapped. He didn't do any of that. He embraced them. And believe it or not, our church is in a very similar place. For 12 years now, we have prayed and believed this promise that says from Isaiah, if you pour out yourself for the hungry, if you satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness and your gloom be as the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually to satisfy your desires in scorched places and make your bones strong. And you will be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters fail not. And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be recalled the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to dwell in. Our prayer has been is that the light of God would shine from the obscure spot of 2903 Goebel Street, and people's lives would be changed. There would be more than just an attendance that we take on Sunday morning, but that the darkness would be lifted, that our community would be changed, our county would be changed, our worlds would be changed, and first our own lives would be changed. And I can tell you, as a pastor, I've often looked at it and wondered, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? When are we going to bear the fruit like Abraham wanted? I mean, Abraham wanted a son. He wanted a family. He believed God for this offspring. And I wonder how many times he went in his mind to that passage we now have in Genesis 3:15 and read it and said, really? Really? And as a pastor, I can tell you it's countless the times that I've walked into this building and thought, really? Is it going to happen? And I made a decision this past year. I looked back. Periodically, every 18 months or so, I've always delivered a state of the church address. And I'll just be honest with you, I didn't do one this year because it was the same thing every year. Here's the promise of God. It's going to be fulfilled. We're going to trust him. And I thought, people don't need to hear that again. They don't need me to find another passage that gives us a promise that we don't see fulfilled. And then lo and behold, over the past 2 years, this is what happened. My nephew came to me a couple years ago and he said, Uncle Dunk, I have led worship at this place called Open Arms Ministry. He said, and he might have seen his picture in the slides last week. It was our nephew. I don't think he goes now, but he did when they first started. He said, Uncle Dunk, this place is amazing. He said, they live by faith, but they're feeding people, but they're doing more than just meeting the physical need. They're meeting the spiritual need. And they're also meeting the emotional need, the career need. They're teaching people how to get jobs. They're doing things that need to happen in our community. And the guy that runs it has quit his job. This was a couple years ago, about 3 now. And he's doing it by faith, and God's providing. And then lo and behold, about 4 months ago or so, our local homeless shelter, day shelter, closed. And it brought me into contact directly again with Mike from Open Arms, whose ministry was going strong. and they filled a lot of gaps that weren't being filled. Now our other place reopened, but it's a temporary reopening till they can get things regrouped. We don't know what's going to happen. But the bottom line of it is this, folks. This is where we are as a church, and I'm going to ask your blessing on this as a church. I don't want to run ahead of you, but I think I've met with our trustees, who are Mike and Linda and Maydeen, and who else? Am I forgetting somebody? Mike, Linda, Maydeen, maybe that's it. There's 4. We met and talked about this, and we see God's hand in it. We have a building that's used about 2 hours a week. And what we would like to do as a church is receive the stranger at our gate. You may or may not be aware, budgetarily, we've been about 40% off budget for about 4 years now. We've not been able to make a budget. You say, well, we're paying the bills. Well, we're paying the bills, but we're not paying your pastor a full salary, and that's fine. I've not complained about that. That's what God called me here for this ministry. Charlotte's gone to work. We're making that happen. I'm not here to talk about that. But we're off, and we've got bills to pay. We don't have any debt. Thank goodness for that. We don't have any debt. We have lights. We have trash pickup. We have ground maintenance, and that's it. Yeah. And we also have janitorial. As you know, we've not been able to pay a janitor. And frankly, we would like to get some support there, because it's just hard work. And it's kind of, Andy's aged beyond that to be able to be responsible for all that. So the stranger at our gate today as a church is Open Arms. I'll give you some of the things that Open Arms is doing. You heard this last week. They're giving ministry opportunities to 25 groups from churches around the county that come in once a month and lead a worship service and feed a meal. It's a great ministry. College students, all kinds of people. They're doing career training classes for for the homeless and the downtrodden. Not all of them are homeless. They're having a worship service every night of the week. They're doing life skills training, teaching people how to take care of themselves, how to do the right things so when they get a job, they know how to take care of themselves. They're getting people into substance abuse counseling who need it. They have a counselor who's volunteering her time and is there several days a week. They're also putting people into homes. They've taken 8 people and moved them in the past year from being homeless to being housed. Now, they don't do that on their site. They have 2 houses off-site that they own or are buying. They don't house people on their site. They don't do that overnight, but they have a place for that. All 8 of those people are either working or on disability. 2 of them are on disability, 6 of them are working. And this may be the most amazing part that you saw Mike share last week. They're doing mission work. They're sending thousands of pounds of surplus food and clothes to Kentucky to serve homeless people there. This is homeless people doing ministry to more homeless people. It's pretty amazing. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to open the doors to our church and let them share our space with us. I'd like for them to be able to use our kitchen. I'd like for them to be able to use some of these classrooms to teach people life skills. Now, what's that mean to us as a church? That means that God's going to call on us to receive and rush to the stranger. You say, oh, Pastor, we can't do that. I can't be here 5 nights a week leading the worship. You don't have to be here anymore, but you have the opportunity. The work is going. It goes. It's happening. But you'll have the opportunity. Let's just say that you decide one night a month you want to say, I want to go down and help prepare food. Or I want to go down and just worship with them. You haven't worshiped till you've worshiped with people who only have Jesus. You haven't. I'm telling you. They don't have anything else. These classrooms could be filled up again with people learning. We could teach parenting classes. I've had a guy call me this week and say, Dwayne, if you do this, or Dwayne, can I come to your church and teach parenting classes? I said, hang on, because I may have a better opportunity for you to even start, where you can go in where they're needed immediately. And you don't have to do anything but show up. He and his wife want to teach parenting and family classes. So what does it mean to us? Well, we've got to rush to them. And I've done that as your pastor. I've stepped out on faith and I've asked them if they're interested. And they are. Their situation is such now that they're paying a pretty steep amount for monthly rent. So my and the trustees and I talked about this, was to say to them, if you come here, you can use our space, and this would be what we would like for you to do. We'd like for you to keep our grounds up, keep our grass cut. Well, they said, well, if we're going to be a guest there, we need to do that. Yep, that's easy. That's save us $500-$600 a year, easy. So we'd like for you to keep our janitorial work up. That's something you can do in kind. They said, absolutely, that makes sense. And I said, we would want you to take over the utilities, because utilities are going to go up if you're using the building that much. We'd like for you to take over the full responsibility for the utilities. Be in our name, but you'd pay us each month. And they said, yeah, I think that's great if your church agrees. So what I'd like to do is be able to go to this ministry and offer them the use of our building with your blessing. I don't want to do it without your blessing. I don't want to run ahead and say, well, we're going to do it anyway, because there will be some challenges. You're going to come in here some Sunday and somebody will have left something out that shouldn't have been left out. It's going to happen. Won't be intentional, but it's going to happen. The building's going to have some wear and tear, but hey, I'd rather have some wear and tear on the building than have it sit empty 160 hours a week. I'd much rather have that. I tried to do this 8 years ago, and I couldn't figure out why with another ministry. We wanted to use it and do daily training for people to use computers, senior adults and parents. And I couldn't figure out why it wouldn't happen. Well, we weren't ready. And I wasn't ready. Also, the person that I was vetting, I vetted the person. Once I got into it and began to investigate them, I found out I didn't trust them. So I backed away. I vetted this place. I've been watching them pretty closely for 2 years now. So that's kind of where we are as a church. I'm as excited about this as I've ever been. Will it be more work for me? Yeah, it will, in a sense. But Mike is the pastor of that group. They even have a small church that meets on Sunday. They're going to work their times out so that we can meet at separate times, and that's fine. Most of the people who meet on Sunday with him are not the homeless. They tend to be with him during the week, and then he has a small church that could share this space. Can you imagine that out of this building, if we've talked about the light shining in darkness and pouring out ourselves to the community, that 8 or 9 people a year could move from being homeless to having a home, that they could get job skills training and they could go to work, that we could serve. Already this year, they've served almost 8,000 or more meals through their kitchen. We hardly serve 8 meals a year. And God's given us this beautiful facility. I beg you as a church to seriously, prayerfully consider engaging in this. And then to say to our people who worship here, welcome to Bethany. We're glad to have you. You want to serve? Well, we have a place you can do that now. The thought of doing this would cost the church, if we did it on our own, would cost us $75,000 a year. They're going to pay us to come here. It's a pretty good proposal. God has really worked out the details. So that's kind of where we are as a church, and the opportunity to do what Abraham did. And I wanted to share it with you today. I'd also be willing to answer any questions about it. I'd like to hear what questions you have about it. I want to make it clear they don't house people overnight here. That's not what they do. This would be a case where they would use the building during the day. Primarily the downstairs is where they will start. They'll use the building during the day. They'll teach classes. That's the other thing. The first thing they'll do is fix the downstairs bathrooms so that those can be used, so that people can get to them. If they're handicapped or whatever, they can get in there. They don't have to come up the steps. Teach classes down there. Mike will have a small office down there, like I have an office up here. And then in the evenings, they will come back and they will have a worship service, probably down there to start, just because it's easier. And they have about 30 to 50 people most nights. They'll worship, then they'll serve a meal, and then Mike takes people home. They don't come to him as much as he picks them up. He runs that way he can control some of the loitering and those kinds of things. He's not had those kinds of problems. So, and he shared some of that last week. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? What are your questions? What things come to mind? What excites you about it? Say, wow, what an opportunity. Anything?